There's a certain kind of person who laughs a little too quickly, who changes the subject right when the conversation gets too real, who says, "I'm good," with such confidence that nobody ever thinks to ask twice. And from the outside, they look like someone who has it together. Steady, reliable, the person everyone else leans on. But if you look a little closer, and most people never do, you start to notice something underneath that composure, something that didn't get there by accident. Today, we're going to talk about what really lives inside a person who has suffered through far more than anyone around them knows. This isn't a video about being broken. It's actually the opposite. We're going to look at the psychology of people who have carried weight that was never theirs to carry alone, what it does to them, how it shapes them, and why the world so consistently misreads them. Because the patterns that form inside someone who has truly suffered, they're not random, they're intelligent, they're adaptive, and once you understand them, you'll never look at a quiet, composed person the same way again. Let's start somewhere most people don't expect. The nervous system. When a person goes through sustained hardship, not one bad week, not one difficult year, but a prolonged season of pain, loss, or instability, the body starts making decisions without asking permission. The stress response system, designed originally to handle short bursts of danger, gets stuck in a kind of permanent low-grade alarm. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, stops spiking in emergencies and instead becomes the baseline. Researchers who study chronic stress call this allostatic overload. It's the point where the system that was built to protect you starts to quietly work against you. And here's what that looks like in real life. It looks like someone who can't fully relax, even on a vacation. It looks like someone who wakes up at 3 a.m. for no reason. It looks like someone who is always slightly braced for the next thing to go wrong. Not because they're anxious by nature, but because for a long time, something always did go wrong. The body learned, and it hasn't unlearned yet. Here's where it gets deeply human. People who have suffered through a great deal almost universally develop what psychologists call a functional exterior, a version of themselves that can operate, can engage, can even laugh, while something much heavier runs quietly in the background. And this isn't manipulation. It's not performance for attention. It developed because at some point, showing what was really happening inside either wasn't safe, wasn't welcome, or simply didn't change anything. So they got good at carrying it invisibly. The problem is that the mask, worn long enough, starts to feel like the face. People who have suffered deeply often lose track of where the coping ends and where they actually begin. They describe it in therapy as feeling like they're always slightly behind a glass wall, present, functional, but not quite fully there, watching their own life more than living it. Psychologists recognize this as a form of dissociation, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but a quiet emotional distancing that the mind uses to survive what the heart couldn't afford to fully feel at the time. Now here's the part that the people closest to them often struggle to understand. Someone who has suffered through a great deal will frequently resist help, not because they're proud, not because they don't need it, but because their experience has taught them something very specific about need. It taught them that needing something from someone is the fastest way to be disappointed. Developmental psychologists studying early attachment patterns have found that when children or even adults repeatedly reach out for support and are met with inconsistency, unavailability, or worse, consequences for asking, the mind adapts by eliminating the reach. It doesn't stop needing, it stops asking. And this creates one of the most painful paradoxes in human emotional experience. The person who has been through the most is often the least able to receive care, precisely because receiving it requires a vulnerability that their history taught them was dangerous. So they deflect, they minimize, they say it's fine honestly, and they mean it not because it is fine, but because some part of them genuinely can't locate the door that would let someone else in. And yet, and this matters enormously, people who have suffered through so much are often some of the most quietly extraordinary human beings you will ever encounter, not despite what they've been through. In many ways, because of it, there is a particular kind of emotional intelligence that only develops through sustained hardship, a sensitivity to other people's pain that doesn't come from reading about it, a patience for human messiness that only makes sense if you've lived through your own. Researchers studying post-traumatic growth, the measurable psychological development that can emerge after deep suffering, consistently find that people who have processed their pain, not buried it, not performed past it, but actually worked through it, often report stronger relationships, deeper values, and a clearer sense of what actually matters. The word there is processed, because suffering that gets processed becomes wisdom. Suffering that gets suppressed becomes a pattern. And that distinction between processing and suppressing is often the quiet fork in the road that determines which direction a person's life ultimately goes. So what does someone like this actually need? Not fixing. They're not broken. Not advice. They've usually already thought of every option. What they need, and what they almost never ask for, is someone who stays, who doesn't flinch when things get heavy, who doesn't offer solutions when the real currency is simply presence, who understands that "I'm fine" sometimes means "I don't believe you'll still be here if I tell you I'm not." And if you recognize yourself in any of this, that tendency to hold everything quietly, to absorb rather than release, to function so well on the outside that even the people who love you don't really know, then maybe the most important thing you can hear today is this: carrying it alone was never a character flaw. It was an intelligent response to a specific set of circumstances. But those circumstances may have changed, and the strategy doesn't have to stay just because the original reason did. You were built to endure. That was never in question. The question is whether you'll ever let yourself be somewhere safe enough to put it down. The people who have been through the most are rarely the ones loudly announcing it. They're usually the steady ones, the capable ones, the ones you'd never guess. And they deserve to be seen, not for their strength, but for the full, complicated, quietly remarkable human beings they actually are. If this video made you think of someone or yourself, share it with them, silently if you need to. Sometimes the right words, arriving at the right moment, change everything. If you want to go deeper into the psychology of human behavior, there's a video right here that I think you'll find just as powerful. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.